Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1480 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday evening into Saturday here in late May. Memorial Day weekend is here, and today's show is brought to you by the Gametime app. Create an account and use that promo code Locked On NBA. $20 off your first purchase with Gametime. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And also at the top of the show, I should tell you to make us your first listen each and every day and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And I was going to hold this podcast, but you know what? It's Memorial Day weekend. People have some travel, I'm sure, happening, some vacationing, some beach time, time in the car, all that fun stuff. And it was good to have another fresh podcast. So myself and Glen Willis are back talking about Bogdan Bogdanovic. If you've been missing it in the recent past, this is the, I guess, maybe annual now, player capsule series, where we've been talking about all of the pieces on the Hawks roster. First, the supporting guys, then Saddiq Bey, AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson's already been published as well. Now we're getting into the rest of the roster, starting with Bogey today. Also had an opportunity to talk to Howard Beck in recent days. I had a mailbag podcast a couple days ago. A great time to listen to the podcast. Really, there's no offseason when it comes to Atlanta Hawks content and coverage. So hopefully everybody's enjoying the show. Without any further delay, we'll get into myself and Glen Willis talking about Bogey. But first, the intro to the podcast, and I'll be back with myself and Glen.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm joined again by my friend Glen Willis to talk about our first old guy in the player capsule series. He's not even that old, but the first non-young guy, non-rookie contract guy that we'll talk about, and that's Bogdanovic. Glen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. Bogdanovic is not old at all. I just have to.
He's not. It's true. I'm older than he is. I'm older than he is. It's fine. But it's.
I'm making more a point of like, I don't want someone to make me feel old by calling him old.
I understand. No, trust me. I did this is a rabbit hole, but it's fine. We're comfortable on this podcast. I did an interview with it was another publication thing, and I referred to Clint and Bogey as the old guys, just kind of offhandedly. And then I was looking at it, and I'm like, Clint's like not old at all, and neither is Bogey. But on this roster, and ever since Vince Carter left, Vince was the last Hawk that was older than me. That's his claim. That's his biggest claim to fame. He's not fancy about anything else. He's just the last Hawk that was older than me was Vince Carter. Like, they don't have old guys on this roster. They haven't for 3 years, basically. So here we are. Bogey's the old guy.
Yep.
So it's sort of a different tone than it is for, in all seriousness, than AJ Griffin or Jalen Johnson or even Saddiq Bey, who's on a rookie contract. Bogey, we kind of understand, is not going to get much better from this point forward. It's not like a future. I mean, you have to look to the future a little bit because he just signed an extension. And I guess we could kind of lead with that. He'll be 31 in August. He signed the extension in March. This is not your forte, Glenn, but I will just say he is not eligible to be traded until September. I get questions about that all the time. It's 6 months from the extension, so September is the time if you wanted to look at that. And I would imagine that they were not going to be trading Bogdanovic, but they're not even allowed to right now. It's the same thing with Clint a couple years ago when he signed the extension. They literally couldn't if they wanted to. But, he signed through 2026. That's a long time for someone who's already in their 30s. He's also making less money every year, and I will just say this at the top of the podcast, that contract, if Bogey is healthy, is totally fine. He's making basically the equivalent of sixth, seventh man money, which is the role that he plays on the Atlanta Hawks roster. So, long story short, Bogey's still really important. He played about 1,500 minutes this year, about 28 minutes a game. Once he got healthy, he stayed healthy. Knock on wood, he's healthy right now. I wouldn't normally lead with that on a podcast that's big picture, but I have said repeatedly, I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway of all with Bogey is that he's healthy entering the summer. But where do you sort of stand with Bogey at this point in time? He's been around for a while now with the Hawks. He's going to be around for a while in the future, it seems, and he's kind of pretty easily projectable, but maybe there's more nuance to that.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think he's so good at the handful of things he does well. Like, he doesn't do – someone guy he does 12 things well. He does 3 or 4 things well, right? But those things he does well, he does really, really well. And it's interesting for me when Bogey comes up because I think some of your listeners may have heard along the way that my in-laws are in Sacramento. I probably saw Bogey play 20 times as a Kings player in Sacramento before he ever got to Atlanta. And so was just kind of captivated to a degree by him. Like watching the lowly Kings at the time, the lowly Kings franchise try to figure out how to integrate Bogey and Buddy Hield, like who should be on the ball. I'm like, that's really a problem. That's really a problem you can't figure out. Like, and those sorts of things is kind of fascinating. But I just think he's like from an offensive standpoint, a perfect guy to put next to Trey. And and we've talked about people are probably tired of hearing us talk about it. They traded Gallo, didn't replace his shooting. Traded Herter, didn't replace his shooting. And we saw the impact once they were able to deploy Bogey and Bay together in different settings across that time, and how that really helped Trey a ton. And so, for me, I know he's a guy who often comes up in Hawks fans like trade Bogey for this or trade Bogey for that. I say be careful. Be careful. It is hard to find guys who can shoot at his level with his level of confidence, who needs very little space to get his shot up, as a guy who's not 6'8", 6'9", a guy who can do it pulling up, on the move, coming off of a screen, running a pick and roll. The versatility he has of all the different ways he can get to his shot is pretty unique, and it's critical. I know we're going to talk about defense and how that kind of factors to lineup construction and stuff, but if I'm thinking about the Hawks' best interest, I don't think they should trade him. I don't want them to trade him. I think he's absolutely critical. He's a great teammate as well. He doesn't, at this point in time, he doesn't care if he starts or comes off the bench, and willing to let other guys kind of have, opportunities that may mean more to their development, their earning potential and stuff like that. So you throw all that together, I think he's a great guy to have on this team.
Yeah, everybody loves Bogey, which you kind of got into there, and he's a really good leader. He's a good voice in the locker room. He says what he means. He's not someone who's always going to say the positive thing, but he will say what needs to be said. He's kind of that guy. And I'm sure every episode listeners are going to roll their eyes when I say this, but I'll just say it for everybody else that maybe not have heard this from me 100 times. Over the last 3 years, the Hawks have been their best when Bogey is at his best. That is undeniable. It's in the numbers. When Bogey is good, the Hawks are good. And it's almost always been that way. The most obvious and famous example of this is when the Hawks made their run in the second half of the 2021 season. Bogey shot 50% from three for about 3 months. And not coincidentally, the Hawks were awesome on offense, and the Hawks won more often than not for the only time in the last 3 years of the regular season was when they got hot then. And he was not the only reason. I'm not saying he's the only reason why. But when he's good, he unlocks so many different things. And you got into it a little bit there. I mean, we'll start with the offense. Like, cleaning the glass, this is just this season, had the Hawks being about 5.5 points better per 100 with Bogey on the floor. That's a big, big jump. Now, They're also worse defensively, which is part of the conversation. We'll come back to that later on, but not as much. So they were better with Bogey on the floor overall than with him off the floor. And as a bench player, that's even more notable. That means, that's the role he's in now. He had one of the best on-off splits on the team. Trey is still near the top of that list. But, basically they're better with Bogey on the floor. That was the case in the playoffs as well. He's tough. The shooting is the primary thing. Like, I think he's probably one of the 20 best shooters in the league. Maybe even a smaller list than that. He's a really, 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 really good shooter. He's not Steph, but his highs are very high. The volume, you mentioned the confidence, that's a huge thing. It's not like Bogey's ever afraid to shoot. Bogey has a quick trigger, and he hunts his shot in a way that I think is very important on this roster, because we've seen at times, Bay's the same reason. So we talked about Bay on a previous episode, and you noted this too. Bay looks for a shot and is ready to shoot, and he's aggressive. There's guys that can shoot, and there's guys that want to, and they're hunting their shots, and Bogey really hunts his shot. And, look, he's also been one of their more potent on-ball players. He's not always known for that, but he's their third best on-ball creator. Probably it's pretty easily. Right now, it's Trey DeJounte, but Bogey's the other guy that really does that. So I say all that, the advanced metrics are really good about his offense. Defense, a little bit more mixed. On the floor, he's really good, and there's a lot of construction stuff, but it's worth kind of just remembering and noting and focusing on for a second. Bogey is an upper echelon offensive player on the wing. He really is. He's that good. He's not a star, but he's very, very, very good offensively when he can move at all. And the knee is a question, but this year, once he got going, he was pretty good, pretty fluid. And between the shooting and the ball handling and his ability as a passer and the fact that he has so much gravity, like, you can't just replace that I agree with you 100%. You can't just go get a guy off the street. Like, you can find a guy who can spot up and shoot it, but Bogey is more than a shooter. His shooting is certainly the primary number one value that he has on offense, but he does a lot more than that. Today's show is brought to you by the Gametime app. If you've ever been trying to find tickets to a big event at the last minute, it can be really stressful. Find out the best idea for your emotions or your wallet. And after all, the ticket buying process should not be the hassle. With Gametime, you have the ability to find a fast and easy way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater, as well as anything you need tickets for. With killer deals, last minute tickets, their best price guarantee. You can avoid stress and start getting hyped for the actual event that you're going to have and all the fun you'll have when you get there. Spring is here, summer is nearing, and there are a lot of things happening in and around Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well. And you can find flash deals with the Gametime app. Also, it's so easy to find tickets that you're looking for any kind of event. You can also see images of where your seat will actually be. And you have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. And with the Gametime guarantee, you'll get the best possible price. If you find tickets for the event in the same row and the same section for any less, you'll be credited 110% from Gametime of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds, and you'll actually be delivered directly to your phone to make things very easy for you. Download the Gametime app right now. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off on your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off on your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it is all about making sure every single player on your roster is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part has to fit just right. The next time you're looking for parts or accessories, head to eBay Motors. eBay's guaranteed fit. You can be sure that every single part that you need actually fits right and does so the first time around. Add your ride to my garage with a green check to know that the part will be fitting or your money will be coming back to you. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when it comes to shopping. And really, when you look at eBay Motors, with over 122 million parts to choose from, you're back in the game in no time. After all, it is very easy to bring home a win when the right parts for your car or truck are actually guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. One more time, that is ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
And on top of that, like, you have a team that doesn't have really a third point guard, right, to turn to. There's Trey's hurt, or DeJounte's missing a few games or whatever. You can put Bogey. Bogey can run 25 pick and rolls for you in a game and do it competently, right? Yep. And it's rare to have a guy who can work off ball, off screen, spot up, do all that sort of stuff, right? And then come on ball and run B-, pick and roll for you across the whole game if you need to do that. That's really hard to find. Right, that's like Buddy Hield can't do that. Like, we can go through the list of all the, the great shooters. Like Seth Curry pick and roll is like on a good day a C+, and so we could kind of go through all of that, and that's where he separates himself from Sadiq Bey. Sadiq Bey can't run a pick and roll, right? No. And so Bogey's versatility kind of comes in that sense, which is great because that gives you more ways to kind of play, use, say, Bogey and Bey together, which they were awesome together, after the trade and all that sort of stuff. But just his versatility, and like I said, he only does like 3 or 4 things, but spot up, creating his own shot, running the pick and roll, and just doing competent things. If he gets chased off the 3-point line, he's not like a lot of shooters where he can't kind of work down to the mid range. He's really good working the mid range if he has to. I think he prefers to put up the 3, and stuff like that. But he has enough variety to his game, even though he does kind of the same things over and over and over. He's a veteran who's like, these are the 4 things I can do. I'm gonna and you take one away, I'm gonna go to the next one, but you're not taking all 4 of them away. And he's one of those guys like, these are my limits, and he plays within those limits like really, really effectively. And that matters a lot, especially when you have young guys coming into roles where their play is going to be up and down. To have a stabilizing guy like Bogey is super valuable.
I agree, and especially we just talked about what he is sort of his versatility in some ways. This year was different for Bogey, like it was for a lot of guys. We'll talk about this later with John Collins and other people. With DeJounte, there was some role change you could see in the numbers. It wasn't quite as glaring for a guy like Bogey than it was for some other people, but he had career low usage. He had career low assist rate, and part of that is just that he just had the ball less because DeJounte had the ball more, and Trey's obviously is going to have the ball a lot. And it wasn't the wrong thing. It's just he used to be in a little bit more of an on-ball role without DeJounte because they really had to have it. And now, but when they had Trey and DeJounte, there just isn't quite as much of that. There's always a guy on the court maybe not always, but 99% of the time when they're healthy, there's a guy on the court that's going to be the primary, and it's not Bogey. So that kind of leads to that. But some numbers here. When you remove garbage time, as Cleaning the Glass does, the Hawks had about a 120 offensive rating with Bogey on the court. That is uber elite, number one in the league level. He took more than 11 threes per 100 possessions. That's a super, super high rate, and shot 41% from three. That's elite shooter stuff. No question about that. And it wasn't an outlier. He's done this before. It's not the first time this has happened. But he gets to the rim less than ever this year. Not a huge surprise if you watched him play. He's gotten a step, probably a half step slower. Again, less usage means less rim frequency. He's more of a shooter than he used to be in terms of like as his primary role. So it's like maybe we're getting into the lane where he'll maybe get less as a playmaker and more as a specialist. And he's not there yet, but like that's one of the concerns if you want to look long term. And most of this will not be long term discussion, but like it's a 4-year contract. By the end of it, he'll be 33, 34. Is he going to be more of a specialist? Maybe, but also he'll be pretty cheap by then. Like his deal's going down, all that stuff. But like it's just really, really useful. And look, there were a lot of questions, and I had some too, about why they signed him to an extension when they did. They're reasonable questions, but I think that especially this front office, Kyle, just as a one data point, but even Landry, like Quinn, I'm sure the way he talks about Bogey is this way. There's a ton of value. It just like the value in having a guy like Bogey, who like you said before, like I said before, doesn't have an ego. I mean, everybody has an ego, but you know what I mean? Doesn't demand touches, doesn't demand this stuff, but like can really do all those things. And then again, you can't have enough shooting. Like before they had Bogey back this year, I mean, rewind the clock, Glenn. You remember back to October, November when Bogey wasn't back yet and how dire the shooting situation was? And it wasn't just Bogey, but just having Bogey versus not. No other context. The team's shooting acumen, the team's spacing, night and day. And again, it's not just him. They needed more than that. And I was banging the drum about it. It wasn't just Bogey, but man, just having Bogey made a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because as we talk, I'm having flashbacks to watching Bogey in Sacramento. I'd be sitting there watching a game at the end of the game, and like it's a one possession game with under a minute, and he's got the ball, and you can just look at him. This was maybe his first and second year in the league, and you could just tell his thought process was, I have no idea what these other four guys are doing. I have no clue what these other four guys are doing, but I'm going to create a shot. And a lot of times he would knock it down. Yeah. So. And you can, I mean, thankfully he's in a better situation than that. But even if you think back to 2 seasons ago when Trey was putting up 30 plus shots in his first playoffs run, and there are a lot of guys at Bogey statures that would have been like, yo, tone it down, or move, Bogey empowers the guys around him and he instills confidence in the guys around him. And for me, that's a big deal. It's a lot. You can tell Trey really trusts him a ton. That matters a lot too.
Yep.
And so for me, like he's one of the last guys I think about trading off this team. If we're talking about making the roster better, having more versatility, more shooting, more defensive acumen, whatever, that's not the first guy I think of trading, to kind of make that happen because, for me and Bogey and Bay, I think they have two of the best 25 shooters in the league. And, maybe that's not exactly the right number. Maybe it's 35. I didn't do an exercise or whatever, in terms of where Bay falls and stuff like that. But that is just so massive for Trey. Just absolutely massive for Trey. And I wouldn't touch it.
Yeah, we talked about on the Steve Bay episode, which I encourage people to listen to if they have not heard it yet, about just how devastating it was by the numbers, even when Bogey and Bay played together, especially with Trey. But even beyond just that, just again, I said it before, but Bogey's presence alone, and Bogey plus Trey had a 124 offensive rating. Those guys flow. I mean, defensively, the numbers are not good, and we'll come back to that in a second. I promise we're going to get there. But I'm glad you mentioned it because I might have forgotten to. Trey really trusts Bogey, like in a way where it's stark. It's different. The roster's different than it was previously, but those guys have always been kind of kindred spirits on the court. Bogey has a toughness level too. Like the Hawks have been inconsistent at times, to be kind, the last couple of years. Bogey is one of the guys on the team that will get everybody ready to go and will kind of just make it plain. I think Clint's the other one that's like kind of like this, maybe John as well. That are like, guys, this is different. We got to show up. We got to be what it is. And Bogey, there's a toughness there. Bogey played in Europe before he got over to the Kings, playing some high level situations, some raucous environments. He's kind of seen everything at this point. And I think like just having that guy, that mentality and that veteranness, like he's not the oldest guy in the world. He's not Vince Carter, but he's been around. Like he's seen a lot of things. And there's a toughness there too, to go along with all of the skill that he does bring. I have one note that I actually shared in a Peachtree Group Slack channel the other day that it's too good to not share. So it's kind of a contrast to the defense. So the defense, we'll get there, but Trey, DeJounte, and Bogey don't play a ton together, but they have, especially when they're shorthanded on the wing at times. That I think everyone could probably understand is kind of a flammable defensive group. They had, I believe it was first percentile defensive rating. They had a 129 defensive rating with Trey, DeJounte, and Bogey on the court together this year. Now, it's kind of self-explanatory, but it's one of those reminders that like there is some limitation here, and like you and I are very high on Bogey. We've I think I've already kind of expressed that on this episode. He does have some weaknesses. You could argue that given his lack of foot speed at this point defensively, he might even be better at the 3, almost playing the 4 on defense on occasion. I know you pointed out before too. But also like he is not a primary defender on the wing. So when your two best players are these smaller guards, you can't really get away with playing Bogey and the two guards together. That's kind of a long way around it. They're really good on offense, but they're so bad defensively that it's like kind of hard to take. So there are limitations there. And I'll just say this, Bogey, I think, has changed. I think when Bogey got to Atlanta, and I'll ask you what you think about this too in a second, I think there was a misconception that Bogey was a bad defender when he arrived. Maybe it's the white European shooter thing. And he's never been the quickest guy in the world. But I think that if you watch every game like we have, he has gotten worse and worse. And I think that most of that, if not all of it, probably is just physical. It's just the physical ability to. He's a half step slower. The knee issues for 2 or 3 years now, to the point where the numbers do not paint a kind picture of Bogey's defense, and neither does the eye test a lot of time. He's a smart player, but I wonder if you see the same thing I do. Like how much worse, if at all, maybe you disagree, has he gotten since he got here? Because it's been 3 years now, and age and all that stuff, but. I think for me anyway, it's become more pronounced. And I think this year was a different level defensively than it was previously, and not in a good way. Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs is fantastic, bringing fit, comfort, and versatility to the table with their products. I feel great when I wear Birddogs, and the stretchy fabric in their shorts gives me a ton of comfort with the ability to wear the same shorts in different situations without having to worry at all about comfort or functionality. I'm not someone who stresses too much about what I'm wearing, but I also want to look good in what I'm wearing and also have it make sense and feel good on my body as well. Birddogs basically checks all those boxes for me each and every time. I am not a dad, but I also hear from dads in my life the perfect pants for dads as well. So if you're doing that sort of thing, it makes perfect sense. So with that said, go to birddogs.com/lockedonnba. When you get there, enter that promo code LOCKEDONNBA. If you do that, it will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. One more time, check it out now at birddogs.com/lockedonnba.
Yeah, so for me, defending on ball has degraded a little for me, but not as much as some might think. There were even games like they closed against Oklahoma City with Bogey defending Shea.
I would have bet my house you brought that up on this podcast. I would have bet any amount of money that anybody could have offered me, and I would have won. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's why you write those articles you do on which lines to bet and stuff like that. But I mean, if it's a guy who doesn't have like a really good first step, right, or a bursty first step, and Bogey can drop a little more than you normally do against the ball handler, he's smart enough to know which angles guys are going to take, and he can kind of manage those angles. Where it's really different is in space. Let's say pulling in from the weak side corner, coming into tag, the big rolling to the rim, and then changing direction and getting back. That has really, really regressed a ton. And for me, he's a classic guy that, like, okay, you've got to, it's sort of like you and I talked about with Bay in that Boston series, that they got better and better and better about adjusting the scheme when Bay went on, getting him out of chase over straight, kind of man-to-man, to getting into more switching and getting to it right away. So for me, if there's not a guy Bogey can put, and credit to Nate and his staff, there were times they were just like, we're just going to put Bogey on ball. The other guy, the guy who's running the offense for the team, is not so dynamic, but let's get Bogey out of space and kind of get him onto the ball, let him use his savvy, and his, veteran kind of play and his smarts and that sort of stuff. And so, like, what was killing the Hawks defensively early in the season was Nate was still kind of doing his thing where we're packing the paint, and the Hawks just had guys who couldn't run back out to the perimeter.
They couldn't close out. Yeah,
close out.
100%.
As the season went on, even before the coaching change, you could see, and this was like when, like, John Collins' defensive value wasn't showing up as much. You could see they were intentional about, okay, we're giving up a million wide open threes, so we're going to help less, and we're going to ask you to be better at the point of attack. And that would just kind of move the problem to a degree with that roster, because they didn't have a lot at the point of attack. But they're like, well, at least maybe we're contesting drives or something, with and things like that. And that kind of helped, some. And then Quinn, I think, took it even further. Quinn was like, contain the ball, contain your guy. We're not going to pull in, from the weak side, as much. And it was still difficult, but Quinn was trying to get the two defenders one pass away from the ball to pinch just a little bit more and just do just not things that are going to shut it down, but do things that are a little bit dissuasive to a guy thinking I have this space to attack. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's a long way of saying it's going to be a pretty scheme dependent thing for him to be successful enough on defense to kind of make it work with other challenged defenders. And that's just something you have to manage as a coaching staff. Is it more switching? Is it putting him on ball versus lesser, point of attack, guys? It's probably a mix of all. Is it keeping him out of space and not putting him on the guy in the weak side corner? It's probably a combination of those things, but it really is going to, I think, be for now, and maybe even become increasingly so, a fairly scheme-dependent thing to have for success on defense.
That makes sense. And I think of Bogey as someone who will do what you ask him to do, and he knows where to be defensively. So that's one positive, is that he's not incapable of executing a scheme. Like, he'll do what you need him to do. He's got great feel for the game on both ends of the floor, but that does show up on defense too. I also think of Bogey as an over-helper. Would that be accurate in your mind? I think Bogey's tendency is over.
Yeah, it's funny because we go back to that Nets game kind of down the stretch where Cam Johnson hit that. I think it was he tied the game, I think. Like with
at the end. Right? Yeah.
And I was like, well, Bogey was the helper. He was low, man, and he got to the rim. And I was wrestling with, like, is what he did was wrong? Like, because he was really urgently getting there. And so I reached out to a few, like, coaches in the league or guys that used to coach in the league and was just like, what do you see here? And to a person, they all said, Bogey is notorious for overdoing helping. Yeah. And they're like, it comes from a good place. He wants to help his teammates, right. But especially on a high leverage defensive possession, he's too early, he's too far, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's there. Now on that possession, they told me DeAndre Hunter letting the ball get middle was 90% of the issue. So they made sure to point that out. But they said this is an issue with Bogey. And so that what I heard from those folks lines up exactly with what you're saying there, and that it's an issue. But again, that's another thing. Like, I think a part of that is he's not confident in navigating that much space and changing direction and getting back. So, oh man, I have to tag. I'm going to get there early because I don't trust myself to, like, catch up, like, and be even a hair late at all. And then can I get back? Am I even going to try to get back, or are we going to X out that, or what have you? And they weren't organized to X out on that specific possession. But that's where I think setting him up for success, scheme-based, role-based, et cetera, it's just something that has to happen for him to play heavy. If he's going to play heavy minutes with Trey and DeJounte, or if he's going to be the guy that plays when one or the other is off, that makes a lot of sense to me. It makes more sense to me, in fact, depending on what AJ slots in. But that's an opportunity. But there are going to be times where you want, for example, Trey plus DeJounte plus Bay plus Bogey to get max shooting on the floor, and you've got to have a plan for that group defensively for me.
It's probably just prayer with that group, but I understand. I think as much as I threw the number out there about him playing with DeJounte and Trey, the majority of his minutes this year was with one of those guys, not both. And that is kind of how they've used him and how they probably should use him, as the number 2 with one of those guys next to him. And that's easier to do now that he's in a primary bench role. He's basically the 6th, 7th man on the roster. When it was mostly DeJounte coming out first this year, you kind of put Bogey in, and then when Trey sits, you still have Bogey on the court. In the times when they had Trey or DeJounte out that night, and they had to use Aaron, they would make sure and smartly to have Bogey on the court with Aaron, because Aaron can't run an offense and Bogey can. And that isn't great, but that's more than like they had to be intentional about doing that, and they were able to do that. But yeah, to your point about the defense, I think I don't mean to psychoanalyze, but I think that Bogey is self-aware. I think he knows he's not the same explosive athlete that he used to be. Not that he was ever an upper echelon NBA athlete, but I think he knows he's not quite the same guy. And his brain, wants him to do certain things. He's trying to figure out where the happy medium is, I guess is what I'll say. And that makes sense. I mean, if you watch him, but look, I mean, there is a world, as much as you and I talked about how valuable he is, they do have to be a little bit cognizant of their other concerns, because Bogey rarely is the only defensive question on the court, which you mentioned before. Like, that's where it gets to be problematic. And it's not Bogey's fault, but he's playing with Trey, or he's playing with Sadiq, or he's playing with AJ. As in current rookie AJ is a negative defender most of the time. So like, that's the roster construction issue. If you want to take just a step back, it's like, okay, we obviously love Trey. We like Bogey. We like Sadiq, but can these guys really play together? And maybe the answer is, like you said, like you have to have a good plan, and it's a scheme shifting plan. And I think with Quinn, you might get a little bit more adaptive than you were before, which probably helps Bogey, and I think it helps everybody. But I mean, that's obviously the big question. It's like, I think everybody knows by the numbers and the eye test that like when Bogey plays, the offense is good as long as Trey's there too. Like, that's a recipe for really good offense. It's just like, can you be good enough defensively and again, it's not we're talking about Bogey on this podcast, so it's framed around Bogey, but like, are there nights when he just can't be out there in crunch time? Maybe, but they've had a tendency to lean on him, especially when they're losing. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, he's a great offensive player, but like, okay, if you're up, let's say 4 with 5 minutes to go, do you want to, it's kind of like pick your poison, and being intentional, I think is the word that you used before. That I totally agree with that. That's for me is like the lineup construction stuff. You have so many guys who are not necessarily full on one-way players, but they heavily lean one way. You know what I mean? Bogey's not so bad defensively. I don't think that I would describe him as a one-way player, but it's getting there. You know what I mean? Trey's same thing. And like, it's a roster construction challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, Bogey will do things like he'll help rebound. He'll come down and be an extra rebounder.
Yeah, he's physical.
So he's a veteran. He knows like this is an area where I can contribute. Well. Yep. And things like that. And to your point, he's physical. He's competitive. He has good hands too. Like he feels the game well. His digs are usually pretty good. Like his steal rate's always been solid, like around 2%. Like, he's not a 0. It's just that he's limited. He'll even surprise you with a block. Like he'll and it's not like, oh, like I went in and like went for this block against this dynamic. Like he'll see like, oh, this, or I can at least challenge this guy's shot, and he'll apply himself to kind of situationally based on who it is, a guy who doesn't have a lot of verticality, or a guy who doesn't tuck the rim a lot, things like that. So yeah, it's fascinating to kind of think about how do you make Bogey plus AJ, how do you make that in the next season? The enduring thing for me with Bogey is whether it was when I was watching him in the first few years of his NBA career in Sacramento, not caring like what time and score was, whatever, just taking shots. It really stands out to me that Philadelphia series when the Hawks won, in the playoffs 2 years ago. It would be like the third quarter, the Hawks would be down like 1,000,000 points. And Bogey's like, I'm still taking my shots. I'm still shooting. I'm going to shoot us back into this. I mean, he doesn't feel pressure. He looks like a guy who just doesn't feel pressure. I'm not going to say he's like devoid of feelings. I'm not, he's some sort of like psychopath or something. He's obviously a very engaging guy. He's very human. That his humanity comes across when he interacts with people and stuff like that. But he does not care. Like, oh, we're down 22 points halfway through the third quarter. I'm still taking my shots, and I'm going to make my shots, and then we're going to kind of try to make this. I mean, they don't come close to winning that Philadelphia series without all the things he did in that series.
No.
He carried that offense by himself for like 10 straight possessions sometimes. And there's just no one else right now. Like, can AJ do that in the future 2 years from now? Maybe. I don't know, right? But right now, like, that's something that not even Trey can do, right? To that degree. Trey just is not experienced in high pressure moments enough yet. Now, is Trey like what Trey did in Game 5 against Boston? Did that remind me some of what Bogey did against Phil? Absolutely, it reminded me of that, right? But Trey also has to handle the ball. Trey also has to get them in their offense. Trey has a lot of responsibility. Bogey was just like, I'm taking my shots. What's the score? I don't care what the score is. I'm taking my shots, and that really benefited them in that situation. And I just think that's something you don't casually, move off your roster.
I agree. No, I think that there's been, I get it. I do understand why some of the natural reaction is like, do we really need Bogey? And part of that's because of AJ. And I think that there's a tendency to just assume those guys have the same role, and they don't. I mean, they kind of do, but they kind of don't. And I get it. I mean, AJ's as we talked about on that podcast, a player that we really like, and I think fans are just like ready for AJ to be a big guy, and I get it. So, and then you throw in the defensive questions, and like it is understandable why people are like, okay, do we really need to move for a better defender? And you and I had the conversation on this show about like, how do you get the perimeter defensive upgrade with the minutes that you kind of have to assign to Trey and DeJounte and Bogey, and like, there's not enough minutes for that. Even if you had that player, like, it's hard.
And that's why I say it has to be a guard. I think the target is a third guard who can defend. Like, who can really defend guards.
And that's the thing. I mean, maybe you get, maybe it's and it's Bogey being more of a pure, like, playing less. I mean, I'm not saying he has to play 30 minutes a game, and he's been averaging about 28, 29 minutes the last 3 or 4 years. He was basically in the same role this year on a minutes perspective that he was in previous years. Once he got back up to speed and was healthy, he was the same role. He wasn't starting as much as he did previous years, but he's kind of been the same kind of deployment for the most part. I wonder if that changes. I wonder if there is a world where AJ's too good and you just have to not play Bogey as much, or you bring in another guard and that guy takes some of Bogey's minutes. Maybe he's down to 24 minutes this year. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And by the way, contract wise, that's okay. As long as he's still the same player, not a problem. But and we'll save the contract stuff for winter night. That's not your thing. But it's like, I do think that Bogey is self-aware enough. He just signed an extension. He obviously wants to be here. I think that as the years go on, he's going to play less. I think it may not be this year when they still have these other challenges, and we'll see what the roster looks like. But yeah, by the end, is he going to be the same player? The math says probably not. You're usually not as good at 33, 34 as you are at 30. That's the reality. But that's thank God for declining contracts and rising salary cap. Like, he'll be being paid like he's the 9th, 10th man by the end of the contract.
Yeah,
yeah,
and a lot of it might be matchup based. Like, you going up against Cleveland, who has Garland and Mitchell, and then two guys who are tough at the 4 and the 5. That's one where, like, on a good team, hey, Bogey, you're not playing a lot tonight, right? You go up against Miami, where it's Jimmy at the 4, and then 3, guys that can handle the ball, 1, 2, and 3, whatever that is. And I know Miami doesn't have the most dynamic guys, 1, 3, 3, but it's just a situation where the other team's 4 is kind of guard-ish, and tough. Okay, maybe you're not going to, play a lot tonight, and so what else? And again, I'll emphasize again, on a good team, that's normal. That's really normal stuff.
Watch the playoffs. I mean, guys that play in all year long and are good in one series. You get to the next series, and they're not like unplayable sometimes, but like you see that there's somebody playing 10 minutes instead of 25, and it's because of the matchup.
Yeah, you got Mike Malone begging Darvin Ham to play D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah, that went through the media. But you know what I mean? Like, and Bogey's the kind of guy, especially as he gets older, is probably going to get more like this, if anything. Yep. Like, there might be matchups where you just can't have him on the 4 defensively. You might not be able to do it, or in a certain series you have to play him on offense because you just need his shooting that badly. So like there's certain it's matchups is it's not a sexy answer, but it really does account for a lot of things. It's like matchup based.
Yeah, and that's why it's good to have a good coach.
It is very helpful to have a coach like Quinn Snyder. Glenn, anything else you want to say about Bogey before we get out of here? Because I mean, we talked about it's kind of it's a challenging subject because like I have a bunch of numbers about like how much systems like his offense, and some of them don't hate his defense, some of them do, and a lot of off stuff. But like, yeah, I think we got a gist about like what Bogey kind of is right now. Yeah. But feel free to add anything else that you want to say.
No, just to recap, it's his confidence, it's his sense of just not feeling pressure. It's the Trey's confidence in him, which is off the charts. It's his being a good teammate and moving in and out of lineups, a different rotation spot, and being just really agreeable about that is really, really good for where this team is right now. Does that change in a year or two from now? It could, but I would say right now, I mean, it would take a lot for me to like trade him off of this team. He brings so much. And yeah, you do have to be careful about lineup construction from a defensive standpoint. That NBA head coaches and their staff should be able to handle that reasonably. And sometimes the answer is, yeah, not going to play a lot tonight. And that's okay on a good team. And so I think he's perfect for Trey. I think he's perfect for, even though he does 3 or 4 things really, really well, there's still kind of a versatility dynamic to him that's really adds a lot offensively. And I just, I think he's perfect for where this team is right now. So I expect he'll be back next year. I expect he'll be a really great contributor next year. And I expect Quinn will probably be lean in a little bit to kind of flexing his time and minutes, like up and down based upon matchup and situation, all that sort of stuff. So really can't say enough positive stuff about him, even though he is what he is defensively. And I think that he tries to give you in what he can in areas where he can and stuff. And otherwise it's kind of on the coaching staff and his teammates to help him.
Yep. No, I agree with that synopsis. And also about the fact that he'll be on the roster. I mean, like I said at the top of the podcast, he is eligible to be traded in September. I would certainly say it's much more likely than not that he is not traded, just logistically. I mean, in addition to everything else that we said basketball-wise, which I agree with, it's really hard to make a kind of a bigger trade in September. Like most business is done by then. So like,
yeah. The only way that works is if a trade is made in August or something.
Yeah, I guess they could. Yeah,
the Andrew Wiggins trade, like when he was,
and that does happen. But like the go-to example of that is literally Andrew Wiggins, which was how many years ago? Like that, it doesn't happen very often.
8, 9. What are we now? Yeah.
So it's possible, but yeah, I think for all the talk about Bogey, could be available. Look, would I bet on him finishing the contract in Atlanta? That's 4 years. I mean, probably not. I mean, most guys don't. That's a long time. But as far as like starting the season in October, I think I would bet on Bogey being here. So.
Agreed.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you, Glenn, for doing this once again. We have many more guys to come. Although we're making some progress on our player capsule series. And again, I thank you for all of the time talking about all of these players. Where can folks find your fantastic work?
Yeah, 8tail and 29 podcasts. Your friend and me, Kevin, and I try to do good work over there. Peachtree Hoops, still supporting that group as much as I can, and then at Willis_Glenn on Twitter. And just enjoy conversation, even if I think your take is kind of pretty wild. still love talking with you about it and exchanging ideas and keeping it fun. So find me there.
There are wild takes on the internet. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Glenn, for being here as always. As for everybody else, please subscribe to the podcast. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Ratings and reviews appreciated. Follow Glenn's work, and we'll see you all next time.